Hello, today I'm jumping into the diffusion of innovation theory developed by Everett Rogers in 1962. In this theory, there are 5 different groups of people that adopt innovations of new technologies at different times depending on their ability and their willingness. I would place myself in the early majority category, which is third out of the progressing 5 categories. I wait for new innovations to become mainstream before adopting them into my life. In some areas, I would consider myself to be a risk taker, but when it comes to spending money or trusting new technologies, I find myself to be pretty hesitant. Sometimes that does cause communication issues with friends, coworkers, or family who fall into different groups. For example, I have one close friend named Bryce who is always camping out and waiting in line for the newest iPhone or Apple product in general. He is definitely an innovator. Because we have always had different responsibilities, I have never really understood why he would spend all of his money on the newest technology rather than moving out of his parents' house. But that's okay. Sometimes we would get into some small arguments about his priorities, but it always came down to the fact that that was his life and that he enjoyed anticipating the next new technology. And he had every right to do that. So that's where we left it. I would say the bulk majority of my friends fall into the early adopters category because it is cool to have something not everyone else has. I have a friend named Hannah who is an EMT and extremely self sufficient. She is absolutely a trendsetter. She never waits in line or talks about whatever new technology is coming out like Bryce does, but she does tend to get trendy new products weeks or even sometimes months before I do. She does usually wait until there are a lot of reviews or talk about the new innovation before engaging in it. Communicating with her about innovations is challenging sometimes, though, because honestly, when she gets it, I want it. So I'm trying to convince myself as to why I don't need it, and she's trying to convince me why I do need it. And usually she's right, and I give in. Which brings me to the third category, the adoptive category, or the third adoptive category, which is the one I place myself in. Again, it's again called the early majority category. This is where about 34% of the population stands and is also considered the practical group. I think being in this group actually helps me to effectively communicate and convince those who are extremely hesitant to change and transition, especially with technological changes. For example, I had a boss who said he wanted to keep up with the newest and greatest technologies, but when they were actually released, he always had excuses as to why we couldn't get them. For example, in the office I worked at, we all had really, really old computers that were constantly shutting down and giving us issues. And my boss, whose name was Marco, saw a TV commercial about new computers that were coming out, and he told us right away that he wanted to get them. But as soon as they came out, he avoided the office for months because he knew we were going to ask him about getting the new computers. It wasn't until he finally sat down with me and had a conversation that I had the opportunity to present him a bunch of reviews and a lot of opinions and proof that those computers would benefit us. So eventually he gave in, but he still waited a few months until the price dropped and until there were several updates that came out. That's why I would place my boss in the fourth category, called the late majority. The technology had to be fully established before he was willing to engage with the new technology. Another example I have experienced of extreme hesitancy to new technology would be with my dad. He was born in the 1940s, so for the majority of his life, he didn't have to engage with computers, cell phones, or even cable TV. He also is a minimalist, so the idea of having to purchase unnecessary things just to be mainstream and communicate with others was totally absurd to him. In the late 2000s, he still refused to own a computer and would not purchase a cell phone. That was a huge problem because he owned his own painting business, and the only way his employees and his clients could get a hold of him was when he was at home and using a home phone. In 2010, I finally sat down with him and explained to him that it is absolutely necessary for him to have a cell phone for his business if he wanted to continue. After much back and forth, he finally agreed to purchase this cell phone and now uses it daily. He still refuses to use a computer, so he hired someone to do all of his online essentials for his business. I think that He was more willing to adopt the new technology because I was able to break it down into pros and cons, and the pros obviously outweighed the cons in his specific situation. In closing, understanding this theory as a whole is very important because it affects every single person in all of our communities. The ability to engage and connect with people from all over the spectrum is central to being an effective communicator. But in order to do that, you have to understand the different people groups. I'm happy with the adopter group I have placed myself in because a healthy amount of hesitancy is good for myself and my family. Thank you.